Courtney.
Here we go.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. I'd like to get started with some introductions. I think that I don't know if people on the call are new to this or if they attended the last session. So can anybody chime in and say new if you're new? Okay, you know who we are then. So
actually, wait, on one note, I wanted to tell everyone, I think you remember me from last time, but my name's Christa Johnson from Snow Pond Center for the Arts. I work closely with Wendy, and we're doing this together. For some reason, my Zoom says John Wigan.
Okay, and I'm Wendy Betts, and my organization is called the Shadow Group, and I've been doing grant writing for 32 years, which tells you how old I am. We're happy to share some of the tips and tricks that we have gained over the years. I think combined, when we think about everybody here, we have we probably have over 100 years of experience between all of us, so that's kind of cool. So that makes me feel ancient, but good in a way. So I'd love to hear from the folks that are in our audience. Can you just do a quick introduction? Tell me what organization you're with, and tell me again if you consider yourself a beginner, intermediate, or advanced grant writer.
I'll go first. My name's Caitlin Pushard. I'm with the Children's Center.
Hi, Caitlin.
Hi. I also just want to let everyone know I have 3 little ones around me, so if I stop the video or get pulled away, that's what's going on. And I would say I'm probably, I feel like a beginner sometimes, but I guess I'm probably intermediate.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Anyone else?
Nathan, you want to go?
I was gonna say I wasn't sure the system of all this because
I'll call you up.
But okay, cool, thank you. So my name's Nathan Mcdonald. I'm with Family Violence Project. I am the Development and Community Engagement Director. I would say that I am pushing intermediate at this point. I took over the position back in like December, and I have applied for like about 12 grants since then. So including a couple federals. So we're getting there, but I would love to learn more tips and tricks.
Awesome.
Bobby Joe?
Good morning, everyone. I'm from the Link Center. I'm the director of the Link Wellness Center, and I am definitely a beginner. So all the help I can get is greatly appreciated.
Okay.
And Bonnie, can you hear us? Bonnie, if you're on the phone, you have to unmute yourself. It's *6. It won't let me unmute you. So Bonnie is from the Dental Center in Augusta at the Bowers.
I remember her.
Yeah.
Okay. Great, that's very helpful. So I want to encourage people, let's keep it kind of informal today, because we have a smaller group. I don't think that we have to stick to those typical norms of you can only ask a question through chat or at the end of something. I would encourage you to chime in. One of the things that worked well yesterday was stopping at the end of each slide to ask if anybody had any questions. So I'll check in with you from time to time. But I think it's probably fine if you want to go ahead and ask a question if something comes up immediately and it relates to something that you're doing. So we want to be as helpful as possible. Use us as consultants right now to forward your mission and forward the progress that you're making with your organizations. With that, let's get started with the slides. We're doing part 2 this time. I think we kind of skimmed over this last time, if memory serves me, but I've divided it up into part 1 and part 2 just to make it easy chunks. And I also have to apologize for my laggy internet out here in rural Cumberland County. It will take a second for the slide to progress, even though I go to the next slide in terms of what I'm saying. The next slide is supposed to be the overview, the 4 steps of this process. And today we're focusing on step 3 and step 4, how to prepare a proposal, and the follow-up process when you get the grant and the reporting that you have to do. Let's see if I can get this to move. Oh, I did it. There we go.
That worked, Wendy.
Okay, it's working really well. It's going really fast. Now I'm too far ahead. There we go. So we're covering items 3 and 4 today, and that's what you have in the slide material that you probably received via email. These slides will also be contained in the information that you received when you did the initial session with us in person. So getting ready for grant writing, I'm thinking about you, Nathan, like you've done some federal grants. How important is planning to that process?
Planning is extremely important, especially for federal grants.
They're massive.
You show up and you get ready to submit your grant and you're all excited, and then you click on a little section that says, oh, you can upload attachments here, and you're like, what do I need these attachments for? And then there's like 8 other things that you have to do within 2 days that you didn't realize existed. So planning is very important.
That's great. And so you're giving an idea of what it's like to do a federal grant, and it's much more complex. So I think that the tip for getting ready and preparing is you've got to do that research part. You've got to look at the instructions. You've got to look at what each funder wants you to submit, whether it's online or whether it's hard copy or email, whether you're mailing things, whether it has to be there before the deadline or it can be postmarked at the deadline. All these little nitpicky things really matter and make it so that life isn't as stressful when you submit these proposals. And I encourage everybody to chime in at this point too, especially somebody who's new. Like if you have something that this doesn't make any sense at all, I think it's important to ask the questions now, because I don't want you to get 10 points down the road and say, what was it? And I missed a key thing. So please chime in. I think is that Bobby Joe? Yes. And by the way, I've always wanted to have that name. Always wanted that.
Can I chime in just for a second first? And I think Wendy and I have worked together on many, many, many federal grants. And I would say we have it down to a science a little bit. And I just would like to take just 1 minute, Wendy, if it's okay, and share our process that we kind of have down to a pat. It's the first thing we do when we tackle a new grant, especially if it's a federal grant or even a small one. I actually, and I believe Wendy does too, we actually print out a copy and take a few days just to read it, highlight it, become aware of everything. We usually have 2 of us reading it because one of us always picks up on something the other one didn't, which is helpful if you can have a second pair of eyes. But even regardless, the first thing I do is print it off, highlight it, and read it multiple times. If it's a federal grant or a large grant, I actually then create a 3-ring binder that's gonna have your directions in it. It's gonna then have your references in it. So everything kind of becomes one set. The next thing we do before we even start writing is we create a Google Doc. And at the very top of that Google Doc in bright red, we have, most importantly, the due date and the time. Just because it's a date, always check your time. Sometimes there are 5 p.m. and not 11:59 or something p.m. We have the date, and we also right there share the link to the site if it's a portal you're going to upload to, and our email, username, and password. And then share that with somebody, because I hate to say this, but just in case you get ill or something happens, you want someone else to be able to keep moving. So we make sure it's all in a Google Doc. We've shared it with each other, and it's got those 3 or 4 basic things at the top. So we're just incredibly organized. Then we start writing the grant. Those are the 4 steps we do every time. I hope that's helpful. It works for us. It's a very organized way to go through it.
And Christa, can I just jump back in, because we had one more person join us, Nicole Cooley, since we're such a small group. Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Nicole.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Courtney. I had someone show up at my door, so I apologize for being a little bit late. I'm Nicole Cooley from the Boys and Girls Club of Kennebec Valley in Gardner.
Thanks, Nicole.
Nicole, do you mind giving us an idea whether you consider yourself a beginner, intermediate, or advanced grant writer?
Probably intermediates would be where I would fall.
Okay. And because we have a small group today, we're kind of keeping it informal, just to let you know. And at the end of every slide, I'll check in and ask if anybody has any questions. But what I'd like to do is leave it open so that people could share their experience. I think your stories are just as important as our stories, and everybody can get something from what you're saying. So feel free to chime in at any time. So Christa just talked about the process that we use, and I'd like to emphasize the 3-ring binder concept. It took me years to develop that. I used to run around with a file box. Is that ridiculous or what? But I would have everything set in a different folder. No, don't do that anymore. I have my 3-ring binder. I have probably over 100 3-ring binders sitting in my storage closet, and they range between, you know, the itty bitty ones and the 3-inch ones that are really hard to carry. And I have an ample supply of the tab dividers that go in there. And I also have a label maker. That is my absolute favorite office tool, my label maker, because that keeps you organized. And you know, Nathan, when you're doing a federal grant proposal, you've got to be organized. And what I put in my binder is I always put in the front section my notes. That's the very first thing. And as I go along with different meetings and review processes that I've engaged in during my federal grant writing process, I keep notes, and it's in chronological order. So I can keep track of who said what and things that I need to remember. And I go back with highlighters to highlight points that I need to make sure that I attend to. So organization is key. The next thing that I put in my binder is the instructions for any grants and any supporting material. And sometimes I print out copies of forms and other attachments that are required. And I also tend to put in there examples if I have any exemplars, if somebody's given me a proposal that they've won that is the same funding source that I'm going for, I'll have that in there. Then I typically include a few resources. There might be a couple of key reports that I have. I'm a hard copy girl. I like things in front of me. So that 3-ring binder can be a really great resource. That said, we just gave a tip on federal grant writing, and we're really focusing more on foundation grant writing here, but that's okay to go back and forth since we're a small group. I don't do the level of organization with foundation grant writing. And I say that because I've done it for so long. Probably a bad thing for me to say, but I've done it for so long, it's second nature. It's like washing the dishes. I don't need instructions anymore. Right. And I know exactly where my stuff is. I usually have one folder where everything sits. We just, as an example, Christa and I just are finishing up a Northern Border Regional Commission grant today, and I only have a folder for that one. But something like a $500,000 ask or greater, I would definitely have a binder for.
And I will say I keep folders on my foundations too. And what's nice is I do keep everything in there because as you get better at this and do more of them, you'll start applying the same foundations every year. And it's so nice to go and I pull my folder, everything's in there, my award letter or my decline from the year before, which lets me start with, okay, let's first start with, you know, what did I do right and what could I improve on last year? So I even keep the folders or the 3-ring binders, depending on how big my project is, and I just go pull it every time I am gonna write it again. So it's a nice way to help you keep organized if it's helpful to you.
And remember, Christa talked about doing Google Docs or whatever format you're using. If you use Google, it's wonderful because everybody can chime in at the same time and give feedback on proposals. You make sure you tidy up your folder once you're done writing. Go back in and make sure, here's a tip that I use. I do all the documents. I have a copy of every document I provided, even if it's my 501c3, I put it in there. Yeah, we do that with every submission, right? But I always put it in there. And for every single document, including the narrative pieces, I write the word final on it so I know which one of those 8 zillion drafts I've worked on is actually the one that I used. One more tip in that regard, sometimes we create this Google Doc and then we have to do a copy and paste over into the grant portal. And there are character restrictions and word restrictions. And sometimes it's way off than what we have in our Google Doc. You know, it doesn't matter how many times we check, we're either over or way under, and it surprises us. I urge people to always, if you tweak it in the online portal, go back and tweak it in your regular document so that you know exactly what you put in there and you can use that in the future. One of the tips that I'd like to tell organizations that are a little larger too, like my school districts, are there any internal approvals needed before you submit, before you even start that grant? It's always good to do things ahead of schedule and have several weeks before something is due. And do you need to go through some sort of internal approval process? That can be really hard in a school district, especially a large one, getting that approval that you need. And we know that the people in central office are coordinating all these funding requests and keeping track of what the priorities are, and they might have a different viewpoint than we have. So make sure you get any internal approvals ahead of time. Yes, go ahead.
I would say on along those lines too, of ensuring that you have communicated effectively to ensure that your finances are properly worked out, because I feel like that's the biggest thing when it comes to grants. So like we only have one administrative person that works on all of our finances, and one time we were applying for like a smaller grant and that person went on vacation, and we were like, well, looks like we're going to dig through the other ones and attempt to makeshift something because there's nothing that we can do about this. So
I would just second that, Nathan. As a grant reviewer at the United Way, I cannot even tell you how many times we have received applications where it's so clear that the financial piece was like the last thing on their mind. And that, I think, is something that, or like the last thing to do. And that's something that our committee of volunteers is always like, they first go to the financials. It's the first thing that they care about. Whereas me, I'm more like, let's look at the narrative. I'd like to know what they have to say. So it definitely varies, but I think for our group, especially at United Way, that's very important.
Yeah.
Great point. Any other comments? Questions?
I think leaving enough time for revisions. I kind of learned that the hard way when I started doing this 5 or 6 years ago now, and we would take it up to the second. And I think I probably have lost a year off my life. I don't do that anymore. Like Wendy and I have a federal grant. I believe it's not due Monday till 5, and we're submitting it today. So it's nice to sit here and be able to take time and do this and know that I still have a few things to do. And please note too, if you don't know this, especially on foundation websites and federal, but on foundation websites, if you go to submit and they're busy, their website's full, their portal's full, and you can't get yours in on time, that's on you, not on them. So typically, no matter what happens, unless they put out a big announcement that says we've had a problem with our portal, we're giving everyone another 24 hours because we fixed it. It's a hard deadline. So I would always advise about 48 hours ahead, at minimum, before the systems get busy.
That's a good point. Leaving enough time. I know that, you know, after all these years of doing this, we've cut it super close a couple times, literally within seconds on one.
It's not worth it.
Not worth it. And Christa is right. It takes years off your life.
It does.
And my family hates it. They know when we're in grant writing mode, and it can be really stressful. So leave yourself a lot of time, and also be forgiving of yourself. We all started in this not knowing a darn thing.
Right.
You know, so just get started. So you're the noob on the block. Like, you're going to learn and you're going to get better. And that first grant that you get is going to propel you to the next one and the next one and the next one. So we're all in this together. And I have seen, and I suspect all of you have seen some really interesting proposals that have incredible passion, but aren't well written. And it's not necessarily your writing skills that get you the funds. It's your concepts. It's whether or not the finances are in order. It's the strength of your organization. There's a lot of things that go into that. So if you're not the best writer and you worry about whether or not to put a comma or not, let that go.
Yes.
I think that that's the last thing you need to be worrying about. And your writing is going to get better and better and better over time. My ninth grade teacher told me I'd never amount to anything. I swear to you, I was the worst writer he had ever seen in high school. And that stuck with me for a long time, but little growth, I overcame it. And, you know, I can say that we've won millions of dollars for organizations in the state of Maine. Yay, right? And I'd like to go back to him and say, hey, guess what?
Right. And on that note, you know, for those of you, especially if you're beginners, I will tell you as many grants as gratefully we've been successful on now. My very first grant I got was for $3,000. I think I did a backflip. I was so excited. And when I go back and read that grant now, I'm like, I submitted that? Like, you've got to be kidding. So it changes everything, but just still submit it. And there's lovely tools now like Grammarly and things like that, that if you're really uncomfortable, load that on your computer. It's free and it'll correct everything for you. So don't just move forward no matter what is our message.
That's a great tip. Grammarly, everybody, you should have it.
I would advise everybody get it on every device they have.
I'm such a geek, I have it on my emails.
Heck yeah, I do too.
Any questions?
No. Okay.
Okay. This is a slide that's this is an overview of some of the things that we're going to talk about more in depth. We're going to be talking about cover letters, the narrative, and project-specific information that you'll want to be able to prepare as you submit these proposals. I have included also an example of a successful grant proposal according to a foundation. The Ramlos Foundation has this on their website, which is why I shared it with you. I have a lot of successful proposals. If you guys want some more examples, I could probably get permission from some of my clients to share them with you so you can see what it looks like. One of the things that we want to make sure that you understand is that not every organization requires every piece that we're going to talk about. So for people who are more in the beginning stages, you're not necessarily going to provide a cover letter with everything. I mean, do it when you can. If it's unclear whether or not you should provide one, and if there's a method to provide it, go ahead and provide it. It's always a courtesy. It's like, I think of it as being like an introduction and a handshake in the beginning. But a lot of organizations are not requiring those now since things are done through grant portals. We'll be talking a little bit about the proposal process or the proposal narrative, including some in-depth information there. And then we're going to talk about project-specific information, including outcomes and sustainability. Tip number one, follow the directions, then follow the directions again and again and again. It's really super important. I'm going to branch off into the federal realm for a minute. If you don't have the right font size, if you don't have the right number of pages, you don't have an attachment, you might get 86'd in 2 seconds. They don't have the time and the resources to look at your proposal, and you've just spent 200 hours preparing something and an enormous amount of stress to get there, and you don't get looked at because you forgot to read what font size and what the spacing was for the lines. Little things really do count in this regard. The comma doesn't count so much, but all these other details in their instructions do. So I highly recommend, whether you're doing a foundation proposal that's 2 pages long or a federal proposal that's 50 pages long, get out those highlighters and go through the instructions and make sure you know exactly what you need to do. And then do it again and again and again and again. The last thing you want to have happen is to mess it up and not get a chance to be reviewed. When you're preparing your information, I want you to remember not to overcommit. Don't say you're going to offer the solar system when all you can offer is the moon, because it's not going to help. It's going to stress you out, and people know and chime in. United Way folks, can you tell when somebody's overcommitting when they're submitting information and you know that it's not realistic? So please try to think of this as being reasonable. Everybody gets it. You guys, you're all busy, and you can't offer, you know, the solar system, like I said. And if in this process you mess up, contact the funders. If you figure out that, oh my gosh, that last sentence is not even supposed to be in there, or you put the wrong attachment in, contact people immediately. At least send an email if you can't pick up the phone, because some foundations don't have ways to contact them directly other than through email. Just let them know. Send a quick message and say, I submitted the wrong proposal. Can you open it back up? And I need to do something else. And I have found that people are very forgiving. Has anyone else ever experienced that? Christa, have you experienced that?
Not. I'm trying to think if I have. Not in a story. No, not in a story that I think I could share. Really, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
That's okay. Any questions on this? Okay, paging to the next slide. Your cover letter. I personally write it last. I know other people write it first. Here's why I write it last. Because my proposal, my design, my project changes. Sometimes on a minute-by-minute basis. So if I've already written a cover letter that says I'm doing X and I'm really doing Y, Z, and part of A, now I've got to go back and do more work. So my tip is to write it last. I also do the same thing with situations in which you are required to write a project abstract, which is very common at the federal level. So if you have to do your abstract, I do it last. And I have a colleague who writes it first. She always writes it first because it becomes her outline. So I encourage you to know what works well for you and follow that process without having to do a lot of extra work. So I think of a cover letter as in being like a mini proposal. And Christa, I'm going to rely on you too to chime in with this. We put in the basic, we look through our proposals and we say, okay, well, what did we ask for? And we have a paragraph about the ask. We always say how much we're asking for. We always recognize whether or not this funder has contributed to us in the past, because it's always another opportunity to say thank you. And it also reminds them that they go through a lot of proposals. They might not remember you. So you're sending them a little signal ahead of time saying, oh, wow, we thought enough of them in the past to fund them. And let's go back in our files and see if what they gave us for their follow-up reports and any other information they provided. And they're going to do a little look back and see how well you did. So it's important to mention that in your cover letter as well. You're also going to, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I always have a short introductory, which is just 2 lines of, you know, thank you for giving us this opportunity, basically, for all the good work you do throughout the state of Maine, something to that effect. And then a middle paragraph, Wendy and I always do about our ask. And then my last one is always a thank you, which includes if they funded us in the past, and we hope that we can look forward to working with you in the future. So it kind of is just three ABC, and I just always use that format, and it works really nicely. And then on the back end, which we'll talk about later, I just reverse it for my thank you letters, which we'll talk about.
That's a great idea. And one of the things, if you're reaching out to a new foundation, someone that doesn't know you, make sure you have a little brief introduction about your organization. You know, you might be called the John Smith Organization, and they're going to go, okay, well, what's that? That's different than saying, oh, we're Hearts to Horses. Oh, this must have something to do with horses. It's a little more self-explanatory, but it's okay to include, you know, a brief statement about who you are and what you do, just like you did in your introduction here. It's only 2 sentences.
Yes, very short.
Any thoughts on the cover letter, experiences, tips?
Wendy, I don't know if this is in the presentation, but I'd like to point out to everyone, this is a really good time to think about too. So in the grant, you'll probably have mentioned this information. You might mention your mission statement. Make sure anything you're saying in your grant also matches your website. Okay, so if you have any information here, you want to make sure because they may go check it. So since you're kind of laying out who you are, especially if you're new to proposing to that organization, make sure that same verbiage or paragraph or history, kind of who we are, is on, if you don't have a website, on your Facebook page. Make sure you're consistent across all your message boards before you ship this off.
Great. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the organizational information that you're going to include in these proposals. Obviously, you're 501c3 if you're writing grants. Well, you could be a school system, but you could actually be other organizations as well. But you qualify for being funded through this foundation. You have a board, you have staff, you may have volunteers. You may have other structures in place that are going to be important to highlight for this organization to understand who you are and how you operate. I'm going to give a quick example here. I work with an organization that has over 400 volunteers. They have 8 staff. So wrap your head around that one for a second. What does that look like? Is that new and unusual? Yes, it is. So when you highlight that, people go, well, how does that work? Well, what's really cool about it is that we spend money training these volunteers to actually do the work because they love us. And then we can offer this service to free for our clients. So that's a really cool model. And I highlight that with that particular client. The other thing that I can highlight for them is that the volunteers themselves are previous clients. So for example, there are a lot of disabled veterans who volunteer to help disabled veterans. And when I'm going to a group that funds veterans, they go, oh, wow, there's a 1-2 punch right there. We're serving veterans for clients as well as volunteers, and everybody's getting a lot out of it. And the organization's able to offer this service for free. So it's a pretty cool thing. And so think about what makes you unique, and you can highlight those things. Always talk about your mission and vision. If you have a vision statement, that's usually required in every proposal. I can't think of a single one where it hasn't been required. And I urge you not to change your mission statement. Yes. This isn't the time to go for revisions and add your own flair to it. Use your organization's stated mission, especially if it's on your website. Just go with what you've got. You can talk about changes to it if you're thinking of adding a component, but don't change the mission as it stands.
It's a little easier to add, I think, Wendy, if you don't mind, to the vision, because it's easy to say, you know, during COVID, our vision has changed it to this, or in the new year, we are adding, you know, it's easy to expand your vision, even though it's on your website. Your mission should be exactly what's on your website.
Yes. You're going to talk about the people that you serve, clients, customers, participants, however you use, whatever you use for the language there. But you're gonna give an overview of who do you actually serve. Are you serving children ages 3.5 to 9.2? Are you serving people with blue hair and purple eyes? You know, just giving silly examples right now, but this is what they want to know, who you're serving. And ideally, who you serve matches up with the purpose of this foundation, who they want to give to. And if there is no match there, you probably don't have the right foundation to go to. So you're thinking about, when you're doing your research, who are our clients or our customers, and who does this foundation want to serve? And you're going to describe that a little bit more in detail in your proposal. You may even have to go in depth. You might say 50% of our customers are teenagers, and that might be really super important for this organization. You might say 100% of the people we serve are over 65 with a disability, however that is. So make sure that you describe your clients well. You're going to talk about your current programs, activities, and accomplishments. Please don't go overboard. You might work with a really large organization. They don't want to know what happens in the corner office in the basement. They want to know in general what happens. So keep it a 50,000 foot view and then zero in on that particular program that you're asking for money for. Does that make sense? Anybody got any questions around that?
I would just support what you said, Wendy, because sometimes we get grants where we have a section, the first section is really about your organization as a whole, and people will spend so much time on that section, and a lot of it's very boilerplate. But then when they get to the section where they need to talk about the specific program they want funding for, that section's a little bit lighter. So I would say, focusing on what you actually want funded is definitely key. Like, I'd like to see just a couple sentences about your organization overall, and then really honing on what exactly it is you want us to support.
I'm going to highlight that with an example. One of my clients is Maine Adaptive Sports and Recreation, and they have a lot of different programs. But when it comes to the overview, I say, we have winter, summer, and specialty programs, and we offer over 12 different sports. Boom. And then my ask might go into more detail about a specific program I'm looking for funding for, which is adaptive cycling on Back Bay in Portland. So then I'm going to dive deep into the Back Bay cycling program. But I want that organization to know that, wow, we've got over 12 different sports and we're in 22 different venues across the state, and we do summer and winter, we're year round. That's all they need to know about that point.
From an organizational, I'm sorry, Nathan. From an organizational standpoint too, these are the kind of things, and I say Google Doc just because that's where I'm comfortable. So I don't, whatever platform you work in, and make sure you save it, of course. But all of this is kind of something we keep in a Google Doc. So every time I go to write a grant, I'm kind of pulling this information. I may tweak it, but once you've done it, and it will be amazing to you. Like how many times have we rewritten even our history, Wendy? Like, as you become better writer, and as your organization expands, it's all based on that incredible foundation of your history. So I go back and I'll tweak that, but I do tend to go back to it. So once you get this stuff written, you'll just keep tweaking something that you've written. You don't have to keep doing it.
Nathan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah. So along those lines, I've started creating these systems to do the same things. Like each year, like along with the binders, I do a folder for like grants 2020, and then within that I have like federal, state, and foundations, and then like within that I have like sample 501c3, sample mission statement, sample history, so like I can just pull. But going back to what you were talking about with the brief overview, I just had a question that was a little bit more specific to our agency. So a lot of the funding that we apply for is for client need, which I think is I find it difficult to give an overview of the entire agency when client need is used throughout the whole agency, because we have so many different programs. So like I always give like a little stump speech being like, we have a proactive and reactive approach. These are our programs, but I never know quite how detailed to go for funding sources that cross all program lines.
That's a good question. United Way folks, do you have any guidance on that? I mean, from your perspective of being reviewers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough one. I think when you are trying to get so many different aspects of the program funded, I think we don't, when I say we, I mean our volunteers, like they're not experts in anything like that you guys are doing, right? Like, so we presume, right? Like they're just trying to get an overview. So I would say definitely keeping that in mind and thinking about what's going to be most appealing and most readily accessible to your average Joe reader, and not going, like, it's so easy for us to get bogged down in our own programs and our acronyms and things like that. So I would say keeping it kind of at a brief overview. I mean, at United Way, we'll just come back and ask more questions, but not every grant is like that. You don't always have that opportunity to do face-to-face interaction.
Nathan, too, it might help if you get another set of eyes on it as well. I mean, Wendy and I are certainly happy to do that, but even within your organization, because I've noticed too that sometimes we're so ingrained in the organization we work in that we talk about it so in depth, and sometimes I'll have my daughter read, or whoever, my husband, whatever, and he'll go, what? Like, because I have to forget that I live in that world, right? Yeah. So it's always good to get a second set of eyes. We're happy to help you do that too if you're kind of feeling stuck on those programs a little bit.
Okay.
You know, Nathan, I would say too that we're all in that bind, I think,
We are.
constantly. Chris and I and John, we were just editing this morning and pulling out things like, yeah, we wanted to squeeze that one point in there, and it's just really not relevant to this particular ask. So we have to keep helping each other and reminding each other, like, don't go down that rabbit hole. Nicely, we say that, but
Yeah, we do.
you know, let's get rid of that little tidbit because we didn't talk about it anyplace else. Why did we stick it here? So it's I think it's an ongoing challenge. And at the federal level, especially, I think you're in a different situation.
Yeah.
With foundations, you can be a little more general, but at the federal level, you may need to elaborate a little bit more. So welcome to the club of being not sure.
Right. I would also say that one of the things that I can speak to, I've gotten better at over the years, is what used to take me maybe 3 sentences to say, I can probably get in one really good sentence. So it's manipulating the English language and verbiage, right? So again, we're always happy to help, but I think it's strengthening those sentences and breaking them down a little bit, probably.
And I'm going to add to that and say that please write in the active voice versus passive. And if this is a challenge for you, again, don't sweat it, but try, because when you write in the active voice, it's fewer words. Yes. It tends to be clearer, and you can meet your character and word counts better. That's one of the lessons that I learned in trimming language too. It was like, oh, geez, I just said that in the passive voice. And I'm not always conscious of that when I'm doing my drafts. You know, when I'm doing my drafts, I'm just sort of like throwing it all out there on the table. And it's when you come to the polishing, try to keep it in the active voice. And then I'm going to add one more tip here that's important to me. When I'm doing federal grants, I always write in the third person. And I know not everybody does that. And I think it's perfectly fine. In fact, I think it's probably preferable when you're doing a foundation grant to write in the first person. We, are, I. It's more personal when you're doing it that way. Yeah, at the federal level, they don't want to hear that as much. They want to hear, you know, Snow Pond does this, Snow Pond does that, staff do this and that. They don't want to say Sarah, George, and Tammy, you know, have a great way of, you know, delivering a program. That's not what they want to hear. So keep it a more academic when you're doing federal proposals.
And I would tell you that my favorite thing to do is when Wendy says, Christa, we have to cut 100 characters. It's my favorite thing to do. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you.
Yes, there's a saying in the English major world, kill your darlings, and it's really tough to do. I would say from the United Way side of things, I think our volunteers also like to see it pretty professional in third person, so I would suggest not doing personal pronouns there either.
Okay.
But that's just me.
Right.
That's helpful to hear because we don't always get the perspective of the funders.
Right.
I have this ongoing discussion with my clients whether to write in the first person or third person. And I know it's natural to go from first person.
I will tell you, the United Way, you guys, it's one of my favorite ways to do grants actually, is to go in and present. I wish more groups would do that because you also get to connect with people. You get to see what lights up their face. It's just really a great, whether you get the grant or not, it's great feedback for you. If anybody's ever applied to the Maine Arts Commission, they also do a really nice job that at least you can listen in on the review and hear the feedback from another perspective. So if you ever have that opportunity, definitely take it because you always hear things that I wouldn't expect to hear.
Definitely. Just moving on to the last couple of points, you're probably going to be able to present, they're going to ask about your funding history, whether it's through a budget narrative, or a specific question. Here's where you have an opportunity to say that other people have funded you. And that's important because it shows the strength of your organization, that people thought enough about you to give you money. And you don't want to be the first person to raise your hand, right? You're a brand new organization, you haven't gotten a dime, and that's harder to get money. So it's okay to talk about how you've been successful in raising funds. And make sure that you emphasize rather specific parts of your organization that are unique or that really are strong. and make sure that you focus it on a way that identifies how it matches with the funder's priorities. I don't want to say we serve hamburgers every Thursday and everybody loves it, when really what they're concerned about is meeting basic needs or making sure kids get food supply or the school supplies. Make sure it's relevant is what I'm trying to say. Any questions, comments? I'm paying attention to the time and I just want to check in with people. Is this pace too slow, too fast? Thoughts?
I think we're doing fine.
Get the information? Okay.
I think it's working well.
Okay, great. So this is where we talk about the project specific or program specific information. And I use those two terms interchangeably because what we do when we're working with any funding sources, we're talking about, I think of the funnel, we're talking about our organization, that's the big picture. And then we drive down into what the specific ask is for. If it's not general operating and it's up here for our entire organization, it's probably specific to a program or a project that you're doing. So it's important to talk about the project and really focus on the project. And what we're going to talk about here is the need or the issue that it addresses. After all, you're in the business of addressing needs in the community, right? That's why you exist. So you're going to talk about why is it an issue in your community? What are the needs? How many people, for instance? How many people are in this situation? How many more might be coming over the next year or two, or very quickly in the next month? What are the changes that you're seeing over time with the needs in the community? There's all sorts of different angles where you can get at this. And what's important here is you're going to give story and data. And I apologize, my very last point says story versus data. They're never versus. It should be story and data. Because Christa can tell an amazing story. Christa is the best at telling a story. And I am a data geek. So I sit there and I go through 25 reports that I should have probably never read, but I did because I loved it. And then I put all the data in there that supports the story and the needs that I'm talking about. So make sure you put in real data, whether it's data you've collected from your customers or clients, data you've collected from surveys, conversations that you've had, whether maybe it's census data, especially if you're doing federal proposals, you've got a lot of data, free and reduced lunch data, whatever it may be. There's all sorts of great data you're going to put in there. Just make sure that it's relevant to what you're talking about. You don't need to talk about free and reduced lunch rates if you want them to buy you a new car necessarily. It just might not be relevant.
Can I give an example maybe that would help? Wendy and I are working with a local youth organization right now trying to find some funding, and they have a great story. Everyone knows their story, and what we didn't have was any data. You know, how many of your families are from, obviously they're from rural areas, how many of them are from low to moderate incomes, how many are financial aid and scholarship. Those kind of small details can be really impactful in a foundation grant. So it's not necessarily like federal grant deep dive information, but some of those basic things. Think about your population and who is your population, and then use data to express who you're helping. Does that help a little bit?
I'm going to give a really quick example of that too. In this instance that you referred to, Christa, we came up with 2 sentences that really told the story. 2 sentences. We said 60% of the people in this county are low to moderate income.
Right.
And then we said a full 35% of our membership requires scholarship to participate. We said it right there. That's it. Boom. But then in a federal proposal, you're probably going to have 5 pages worth of data where you have tables and you're explaining a lot of information around there. So I see you shaking your head. Yes, indeed. You probably know data really well.
Happy to help you with those. And I would say too, we were talking about here balancing data with stories. Stories are important. I mean, stories, I think Courtney would vouch for this. When we came in to talk to the United Way about some of our programs, you know, we're talking about kids. We're talking about kids that needs assistance. So you want to be accurate and truthful. Don't stretch the truth, but you want to pull those heartstrings. I mean, you're trying to get funding for something that you're passionate about. If you're not passionate about it, it's probably not something you should be asking for funding about, because it needs to almost come out naturally a little bit. So make sure you're telling the story in a way, you know, why should we help this population, if it's kiddos or adults or whatever's going on. But you want to, it's a really fine line of data to support your really good story, I guess.
Yeah, especially with like federal grants too, because like they don't know about you because we're very minuscule in the grand scheme of things.
And federal
So,
grants
like,
are a little different, that they're not so heartfelt. They're that's more foundations. They want to know you a little bit.
Yeah, well, because like the federal grant, one of the ones that we applied for was for rural Maine, and so like we talked about rural Maine and the statistics, but then we're like, okay, but also like we serve Somerset County, which like a town in Jackman, the nearest police force is 82 miles away. We had a client that it took 2 hours for them to get law enforcement there. Like, so kind of looping in like the story heartfelt into the, like the actual, like these are the geographic location of everything in the county. Like, please understand this.
That's a great example. Thank you.
Christa, just to your point about like really believing in what you're doing, whether that's in your writing process or in your application itself, you know, it's hard to ask for money, right? Like it's tough. It can be tough. And I think one of the things that I started doing really early on, or got to this point, was every time I'm writing a grant or approaching someone to ask for money, which I do like every day in my job, right? Like always begging people for money, is to just, you have to go in and believe in what you're selling. And you have to say to yourself, I'm not asking you for money. I'm giving you a huge opportunity to invest in what I'm selling you. And if you approach something with that attitude, I think you will have more confidence in what you're selling, and they'll have more confidence in you.
Yeah, and I've just kind of changed my language over the last 2 years, like especially with United Way, Courtney. I think you've been really helpful with this. You're my partner. Do you know what I mean? So I look at any foundation as coming on as a partner because they believe in our mission. And sorry, Courtney, not so much that I have to sell them. I mean, here's our mission, and if you believe in it, then we can partner together to make things better. Is that right, Courtney?
Yeah, and definitely not adjusting your mission to fit. You know, like Wendy said, like sometimes it's just not a good fit. This just might not be the right grant for you or the right opportunity for you, and that's okay too. Like just know that and move on and cross it off your list, because you don't want to waste time.
Great. I'm aware of the time. We're at 11 o'clock right now. What is our constraint?
11:30, I think, right, Courtney?
Okay, great. I think we'll make it.
Is that right, Courtney?
Okay.
Yep.
One of the things you're going to address in your proposal, everybody's asking, they've been asking for 20 years. They don't know what they're necessarily asking for, but they're asking. They want to know your goals and your outcomes, or impact is another way to say that. You know what the impact is that you're having. You may not necessarily have great measures yet, but keep plugging away at that. And I think that in my opinion, our foundations, even our federal government, don't always understand what outcomes are, even though they require it from us. As an example, I got a reviewer who looked at my logic model, and somebody gave me an incredibly low score, and the other two reviewers gave me great marks. And I looked at that and I said, I think this just might be a reflection of the lack of understanding of the reviewer, but it hurt me in the long run. We didn't get the grant.
Yeah.
So I just want to emphasize the fact that we've been working on this for 20, 25 years, weaving outcome measures into our work and focusing on overall program evaluation, whether it's process evaluation or impact evaluation. There are a lot of resources available to help you with this, and don't overthink it. Sometimes an output is like a number. An output is how many people did you serve. Sometimes that is your outcome. So don't necessarily overthink it. Sometimes it's, we want to get 25 more new parents in the door, because we know in the long run, we're going to have some kind of an impact, which is increasing knowledge, skills, attitudes, something. We're going to improve learning. But right now we're focusing on getting them in the door. So your output and your outcome can be the same thing. In other instances, they're not the same thing. We don't want to just count kids. What did we really do for those kids? And so you have to think about it in that way. And so that's a whole other workshop, talking about designing outcomes and creating logic models. And I'm really only skimming it here, but I want you to know that it's really important. Some organizations in Maine, Opportunity Alliance in particular, I'm aware that they took about 2 years to shift how they were doing business to focus on outcomes. So everything they do is driven by their outcomes, which is great. And that's really how we should be looking at things. But we're still in that transition period. So I would say be gentle with yourself, but jump ahead of the curve. Take some time yourself to learn a little more about doing program evaluation and the simple things that you can implement in your organization where you can at least count what's going on. And then the next step will be, what difference did that make? Did our program really change something, increase knowledge, skills, attitudes, etc.? Anybody have any specific questions on outcomes? Anybody hate outcomes?
I do. Everybody has their strengths, and that's always a hard one for me. And I only say that to be honest. Wendy and I make a great team because we're both good at, Wendy's great at everything, but we complement each other, and it's okay for not everything to be your strong suit. You get better at it, but it's always like, when I had to give up and get a speech, getting up was the hardest part. When I get to the outcomes, I always drag my feet a little bit, but if you don't overthink it, Wendy's right, then don't get scared of it. They're easier to do. But I just want to admit that it's not all is easy for everyone, right?
I have a quick comment, Wendy, about that.
Sure.
And I don't write grants, but sometimes Christa and I work together on something, or I approach businesses for sponsorships. So I'm in similar situations, and I really appreciated that piece, because just to know that other people feel this is sometimes a little vague, but to be able to really confidently say that the outcome of this is that, these teens will be more confident in this way, and feel like it's okay to say that, because otherwise it feels like almost like, am I okay that I'm saying this thing that sounds kind of vague? But it isn't vague. It's a specific outcome, but it doesn't have data. They'll have 50% more confidence. It's just that they'll be more confident because we did a performing arts workshop with them, whatever. So thank you for addressing that. Was beneficial to me.
Excellent, thank you.
On another quick, interesting diversion here, it would almost be interesting, Courtney, to do another piece on, kind of branding. I know you've had a marketing course before, but what you're saying in your grants, you need to have other people in your organization communicating. Make sure you're all on the same page. So I call it, that's really branding, but make sure your message is across the board. That's why Christine is our community outreach director, and we work very closely together, because what she's experienced in the community, I need to get into the grants. What I'm writing in the grants, she needs to get out into the community. So make sure whoever you work with, you're all using the same verbiage and same messaging.
I do want to address that slide was actually talking about project goals and impact, and I went into outcomes. This is a little bit of backward design, if you will. I think about what's the overall purpose of what we're trying to do. And ideally, the goal is the impact. That's why I discuss the two on the same page. Your goal is to get people in the door. Yeah, so what? You don't want people to just get in the door, right? You don't want them to just stand there. You want them to get something from what you're doing. So think about it all the way to the end. What is it that you want your folks to have? Maybe it's that they're not hungry anymore. Maybe it's that they now have an education that will get them a better job, so that their lives will be better, that they can take care of their kids and their confidence level increases. It can be a lot of different things, but try to drill down, identify what that is, and keep it simple. You don't have to have 25 outcomes for a program that costs $5,000. If you were, a researcher at USM, you might want that, but not for your programs. Just keep it simple. And I hope that helps.
And I'm gonna just jump in again, sorry. But I think from a United Way perspective, sustainability is becoming our middle name. Like if you come to us and say, hey, I need funding for this to get started, but my hope is that it's going to start sustaining itself or paying for itself. Like, that is ideal. I'd love to see more applications like that. And I understand that's not every program, it's not every organization. You know, there's always going to be a need for food help, right? But there are other programs, like when I worked at crisis and counseling centers, every year we were submitting a different program. And at first United Way was confused and said, you know, why are you asking for new money every year for something different? And I was like, well, it's because we built this so that it can sustain itself, which is what you guys probably should want, right? So, so we really moved in that direction more.
Good point. Nathan, do you have any questions on that? I mean, you're doing federal proposals, and it ends up being, I think, a bigger piece in federal proposals.
Not really. Luckily, like the first federal proposal we did was in partnership with Pine Tree Legal. So a lot of that, they reviewed the application once we finished it, and they offered a lot of good critiques. So I think for the most part, we're pretty good with outcomes just because we've been doing it for so long.
Great. So let's move on to the budget and the fundraising aspect of the budget. Your budget is going to be, there's two pieces to your budget, by the way. They're going to want your organizational budget, and then they're going to want your project or program budget. So there's two pieces in there. Different foundations want it in different ways. They might want to incorporate it into something that they've designed. They might just give you free rein so you can design your own. They might do them as separate attachments. They might do them as a part of the whole application. So just know when you get there, you're going to have to try to figure that out. It's usually pretty straightforward, but if you have to create your own budget, it's pretty easy. I would highly recommend you research that. You can get a Google basic proposal budget or program budget. You'll have income and you'll have expenses. And under your income, you're going to put all the resources that you have now to support your program. You might have donors, individual donors. You might have foundations who have already committed, or foundations you've submitted requests to, and you're going to want to highlight that. You might have other resources that you want to highlight there. You might have a significant amount of in-kind volunteer time. That's going to go under your income because that's something that's valued. And that's a whole other discussion as well. At this point, you probably won't have to do in-kind, but it could come into play. So just remember that. And you're going to make sure that what you're talking about in your narrative, what you're asking for, the program that you're designing matches with those numbers. A silly example, we're going to help people, we're going to increase food security in Cumberland County. And in your budget, you're asking for a jet ski. No, that doesn't match. It doesn't line up, right? A silly example again, but you've got to make sure that it matches. So if you're asking for software for your development department and what you're trying to do is reduce food insecurity, you've got to be able to tell a story why that's relevant. So know that, and I heard you say that you look at, a lot of your people look at the budgets first, right? United Way folks, they look at the budget first because the budget tells a story. And the budget needs to match directly with that narrative. I personally like to go to the narrative first, then see how the budget backs it up, but they've got to align, and that's critical, because if they don't align, people are going to have too many questions. These reviewers are going to say, I don't get this. Why do they need that $5,000? Or why do they need $23,000 for that? And they're less likely to fund the level that you're requesting. Would that be a correct statement, Courtney?
Yeah, I think that's very accurate.
Christa, do you have anything you want to add on this? I mean, I know you've got a ton of experience with the sustainability piece from an organization perspective.
Right.
I mean, and you talked about that, Courtney, as well, that sustainability is what we're all reaching for. However, realistically, we know that when we do new things, they're not sustainable yet. And
Right.
Some programs will never be in a place where they cannot ask for another grant.
Although I think it's a little bit of a balance. I mean, I can only speak from my experience of working with foundations. They at least, it's kind of like, I look at it as if you were going to open a business, right? You wouldn't open a business without a business plan. So even though you need the grants, you want to show that you have an idea for sustainability. And I'm always very honest. I always say, I might put in the Onion Foundation $3,000 next year. Like, I'm probably going to come back and ask for that. But I also expect program growth to do this, or I expect to ask for a little less next year. Like, I think they just want to see that you're thinking about the future, because they only have so many dollars and they want to help everyone. But if you don't have it's hard to fund someone when you don't know if the program's going to be there in 1 year. So I think it's kind of like writing a business plan, and that doesn't mean it's perfect. That doesn't mean it's not going to get tweaked. That doesn't mean it's not going to change, and they're not going to judge you on that. I think they want to know that you've thought through the process. Is that fair, Courtney? That's my experience.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I would say too, like, if it's a new program, a new foundation or what have you, that you don't have a relationship with yet, I would say go with something that's a sure thing, like something that's really going to appeal to a broad audience. And then you can maybe, once you build a relationship, do something that might be a little bit riskier. We used to do that with the Biles Foundation and say, hey, you've been funding this for a while. This might be a little off brand, but what do you think about this? And once you've built that rapport and that relationship, then they're more likely to trust that the next thing you're going to do is also going to be great.
And I will say too that I can only speak for Snow Pond Center for the Arts. I joined here about 6 years ago, and Wendy and I started writing grants together. And I was not a grant writer before that. I always wanted to ask for the maximum amount. It's just my nature. I learned to ask for less and prove to them that I was worth it, and build that relationship and go back for more later. So you might want to consider that if you're a new foundation, you're applying to a foundation you've never applied to before.
That's a really good point, and that's one of the things we talked about in the initial workshop that we did, researching your funding sources. It's not always easy to find information about a particular foundation, how much they funded and who they gave to and how much, but that looking at each foundation's 990 and doing that research of 2 to 4 years on each foundation's 990 can be really helpful in helping you to decide whether or not to ask for the full amount, or what to ask for. You know, what are they funding other organizations that look like you? Are they only giving them $5,000, or are they giving them $25,000? You don't want to come in way too low or way too high. It's an opportunity for you to look at the data to say, let's be reasonable here. What makes sense? So please don't always ask for the most amount of money if it doesn't make sense for your situation. One of the things you're going to do in your budget, I talked about what your revenues are. You're going to highlight if you've asked for money from other foundations or other resources. For instance, you might have an annual campaign coming up, and you could put that in there and put the money that might be designated for this project in there. You also want to highlight the other foundations that you've requested money from, and put in there whether or not it's requested, whether or not it's been committed, and whether or not it's been received. That's really helpful information. So don't just put, you know, Libra Foundation, $25,000. Was that a dream? Or was that actually a proposal that went in? Or was that a check that you received in the mail? That would be really helpful for reviewers to know. Any other thoughts, comments, people's experience with this? Things that you might have learned recently in the processes you've used? Okay, I think we talked a lot, actually. I tend to go into program evaluation, and I apologize, it's my favorite subject. Actually, this would be the only thing I would do if my talents and the funding supported it. I would just be in the evaluation a section all the time. We talked a lot about this, and the one thing that I want you to know is that there's a slide here that can help jog your memory, and remember that you can do something as simple as a satisfaction survey. You can ask 5 questions. You can do it on people's smartphones. Everybody's got a smartphone. There are lots of great ways to collect data. Just don't forget to do it. It's really important. I mean, you could say, what did you like about the program? What did you not like? And people might leave that blank, and that usually means that they don't have anything that comes to mind. But it can be really helpful to understand some things if you can get some satisfaction survey data in the process. I think we've already, the next slide is about sustainability. And what I'd like to do is focus on sustainability from two perspectives. And I know we already kind of talked about this, but I'd like to package it a little bit differently. There's sustainability in learning, there's sustainability in funding. So what you want to be able to do is kind of touch base on both. You're describing how you're building upon a program or a project. Just like you said, Courtney, we've done this in the past and we've learned these great things. Now we know this is our next step. So you're displaying here sustainability and learning as you're going along. Everybody's doing this naturally, so don't feel like you're wrong if something went wrong in your project approach. You learned. Now you're going to change what you're doing to make sure that you cover your bases next time. So it's okay to talk about that learning. It's a natural part of the program and organizational process, and dare I say it's a natural part of life. We're always learning and growing. So it's okay to admit that and display when you know you've done some great learning and how that's changing your perspective and your approach. It's really helpful if you have constituent involvement in this whole process. So if I'm an organization that serves people with disabilities and I don't have a board member who has a disability, or I am not pulling together my constituents, my participants, and saying, hey, you guys, what do you like? What don't you like? What do you need? That's a problem. I've got to collect that information from the people I'm serving. Otherwise, I can quickly become irrelevant, and my quality can be lacking. So I highly encourage you to have constituent involvement at every level of your organization and to talk about it under the sustainability plan. Courtney, do you have any thoughts on that?
My only thought is, a lot of organizations do this automatically, like mental health organizations, they're really required, like Bobby Joe, I'm looking at you, you probably are required to have some board participants or a separate consumer advisory board. But for others, I think it's just really nice to think about, like the Children's Center comes to mind. Like, I don't know if you guys have parents on your board or things like that, which I know you actually do. So things like that, I mean, it's something we might not know about when you just give us a board list, but it would be nice to say parent of whatever, or, I mean, that's just an example, but it's really nice to see that you guys are making a conscious effort to include some of your consumers.
Great. I think we already talked about sustainability with funding. We're talking about how we're going to get other revenues, how we're going to support ourselves. Oh, there was a point I wanted to make and it just flew right out of my mind. Let's see.
It'll come back.
Oh, the example of today, actually, Christa, the work that we're doing right now. I'm going to give an example of how sustainability can sometimes be really super easy to address. We're asking for grant money to finish some capital projects on the Snow Pond campus. And one of the things that's going to do for us, one of the outcomes is we're going to get more people in the door. And the more people that come in the door, the more money they spend when they're on our campus. So there's a direct correlation between getting that building built and getting more money for the organization and having a greater impact on our community because we're serving more people. And that revenue generated by that is going to help sustain not just that program, but the entire organization. So under the sustainability section, we were able to say our revenues will go up X% over the next 36 months. And then thereafter, we should add another X% each year. So that's a really logical way to tell the story of sustainability and the importance of your project. My next slide is about budget, and we've really talked quite a bit about the budget. And this slide, I just want to reference it because it has details. It's got to reflect the details of your program. You've got to talk about all the elements of your program. Sometimes program design, people don't think about this. Grant writing is all about program design in lots of ways. So this is where we hash it all out. Like, what's this really going to look like when we're implementing a program or a project? Please don't include extra stuff, no jet skis. Program and organizational budget, I said that you're going to want to have both on hand. and show the funds that you already have and make sure you tell whether or not they've been committed or uncommitted or pending. That's a good way of putting it. Here are some proposal preparation tips. This is from the Maine Community Foundation website. And I love this because my first tip is follow the directions, and so is theirs. Follow the directions. Write in a simple, direct, and persuasive style. Do your homework, right? Be as specific as you can. Slick doesn't count. Guess what? The strunk and white doesn't count so much here. Preparation does. Did you really do your homework? It's okay if the comma is out of place. Strong and accurate budget is really super important. So this is actually the whole outline for this presentation on how to write a decent grant proposal that should get you some funding. So here's another resource. Please go to this resource. The Maine Community Foundation is amazing. They give more money than any other organization in the state of Maine, and they get us. They are us. They're amazing people, and pick up the phone and talk to people there if you're looking for some funding on something, and they will direct you to how you can get that. Now we're moving into the tail end of this. This is the last piece. That's the follow-up. You got funded, yay. But if you didn't, your heart's broken, and there's hope. So don't feel too bad. If you got the grant, there's a path you're going to go down. We got a flow chart here, but if you got rejected, it's okay. Try to go back to the organization if they have someone available and see if you can get some feedback. I'm going to say in my experience, 75% of the time I can't get feedback. So you just have to figure that out with the particular funding source that you're working with. On the federal level, lots of times they'll give you the reviewer rating sheets, so you can really get some detail on your strengths and weaknesses. And if they don't automatically give that to you, ask if you can get it. This is really the learning experience. And ask if you can resubmit and when. Don't give up. It can take time. My experience tells me that when you're first starting out, you're going to get 1 out of 10. And that's really good. So maybe it's going to be 1 out of 15 for you because of the program and the strength of your organization, or it's reviewers that have a different perspective. There are a lot of factors that go into getting funding that are far beyond the control of the grant writer. And that's just a fact of things. How many times has anybody on this call submitted a proposal to an organization that said, we fund X, and you put in X and they wrote you back and said, so sorry you didn't get funded. Today we decided to fund Y. And it's like, oh, great. But you just know it's going to happen. It's happened to all of us. And your heart's going to be broken for a few minutes, but pick it up and get on, because every time I get a no, I have a little checklist. Oop, I'm one more step closer to the yes. And that's really how you have to think about it. It's really tough when you're living in a world of no's. You can get to yes, and a really great grant writer, theoretically, you get 3 out of 10. So it's like a batting average. We get 3 out of 10. And sometimes we're lucky and we get 4 and 5 out of 10. And then other times we get 2 out of 10. So start to—
I'd like to add to that if you don't mind, because I know we're getting close on time, and we were going to talk about relationships a little bit, but this is where you have an opportunity, especially if you're rejected. If you are accepted, you're automatically going to start to build a relationship with them, right? You're going to send a thank you letter. They're going to send a check. You're going to do a report. That starts a relationship. When I first started here, the no's were more than the yeses, of course. Every single person got a letter, because no matter what, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the time it took for you and all of your cohorts or your board or whomever reviewed the grant, taking the time to do it. And even though we couldn't partner now, I hope to partner in the future. This might add a lot to your plate, but we worked really hard here at Snow Pond. The first year or two I think I was here, I started sending out kind of around the holidays, end of year kind of thing, not holiday related, but I just want to update you on what we've done this year. And I sent it to everybody, whether they gave us a grant or not. That helped to start build relationships. So the next time I applied, they were like, oh, they might not remember I sent the thank you letter, but I promise you they're going to pull my file. Oh, she sent a thank you letter. They sent this. Oh, that's right. I saw that. And it starts a conversation. So I think a no is still a great opportunity to work to build a relationship and say thank you for their time.
And just quickly on the thank you note, yes, we do appreciate that, Christa. And honestly, you're one of the few organizations we get a thank you note from, and it goes a hugely long way. And we don't give out that many notes, but even like for yeses, I think it makes a big difference, and it goes into your organization's file, and it does build that relationship.
Yeah, it's the very first thing I do because they took the time to do it and they helped you. I mean, I just think it's part of the grant. Like, just make it part of the process. I can't imagine not doing that. So I'm glad you like us, Courtney.
Great. If you get the grant, Christa touched on this, sending a thank you note or call, and make sure that you find out what you have to do to be in compliance and what the due dates are related to those compliance pieces. Yep. Some organizations don't require anything. Other foundations want you to do quarterly reports. Other foundations want a year-end, this was awesome, we spent all the money and we served 10 people. So
most people at least want a yearly report, a year from the date you get the grant. It's pretty typical. So just make sure to get it in your calendar. I always put it in a month ahead of time. They're not hard to do. It's usually a one-page thing, but it's important. So they have data for their funders. I mean, it all trickles down. So I think it's important to get that back to them.
One point in the concept of building the relationship with organizations is that their funding priorities shift from time to time, and some organizations have websites that display that. But if you have built a relationship with this foundation, you're going to probably know that when they shift their priorities, and they can help guide you through that process. And if you're thinking about new programs, you can pick up the phone and tell them what you're thinking of before you write a grant proposal, and they can tell you whether or not they think it's appropriate for you to submit, and it will save you lots of time and potential stress.
Wendy, I was going to comment on that. I was just thinking that I wanted to mention that before we hung up. I can't tell you how many organizations I've called when I was getting to know them to say, this is what I'm thinking. Can I set up a call with you? This is what we're thinking of proposing. Does it align with your mission? Because the worst thing you want to do is waste your time or theirs. So it's better to be on the same page. So I've done that many, many times, and I find it very helpful.
Definitely. It's better to know ahead of time than it is to get the info and find out later. So
there's something that's right for you. You don't try to fit in, don't put the square peg in the round hole. You know, there's somebody that's right for you.
So we're on time right now, but I can cover this in 30 seconds. Here's just a little example of how we keep track of the winners and the losers. There are no losers, right? But this is how we keep track of what we submitted and whether or not something came in, what the award was, a very quick and dirty sort of, oh, did we actually submit a proposal? When did we submit a proposal to Libra? Oh, we did it in 2016 and 2018. You want to have that data in one place, and it can be this simple. This is just a very straightforward example of how you can keep track of that. So please feel free to use that. Does anybody have another method that they use?
I do this in a Google Doc, everyone, and here's a great example. I was on a board meeting call last week, and one of the board members, they've never asked me before, they said, Christa, we'd love to see all these grants you've submitted. I went, sure, hold on, and I shared the entire document with them. Now, they will ask me for that again and again, and I can remind it that I've already shared them with them. However, not only am I organized, but it was easy to show all my work and that the company's organized. So I think that's a really great way to share your information with your cohorts, your boss, or et cetera, your board.
Awesome. So the last slide here is the whole concept of, can't you just submit the proposal again? People, your boss might be saying that to you, or your colleagues might be saying that to you. Just give it to somebody else. It's not necessarily that easy. You can recycle a lot of things from proposals, but chances are you're going to tweak them. It's appropriate to tweak and focus on the particular foundation's priorities. So if you have a program that focuses on X and Y, and this funder really loves Y, focus on that. And next time you might focus on X. It really depends on the priorities of the funding source. But you can basically adapt things. It's sort of a yes and no here. You can adapt what you've already written to help you with the next proposal. And I bet you're seeing that too, Nathan, that's clearly something that we do. We don't necessarily lift word for word. We usually adapt and modify. That's it, folks. Questions? Tips? Anybody got a tip they're dying to share?
I don't have any tips or questions, but I just want to say thank you so much, ladies, because it takes some of the frightening part of it out of trying to write a grant to, like, when you guys are talking about it so enthusiastically, I'm like, yeah, I can do this. I can do it. So
Awesome.
thank you very much.
And Bobby Joe, we're always here to help too. I mean, I'm here at Snow Pond. Wendy's number's right there. Really, don't hesitate to reach out. I mean, people helped us. I'm happy to help always.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course.
And I'll just second what Bobby Joe said. Thank you guys so much for taking the time, not once, but twice, to help our partner programs out. It really goes a long way, and we will get this video out to everybody as soon as we can so that they have the resources as well. But just so grateful for your time and for Snow Pond as a partner program in every sense of the word, and to Wendy and the Shadow Group for stepping in a couple times here as well. So thank you guys.
You're welcome.
Everybody be safe. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Courtney.
Thanks, everybody.